What's shaking? Hey, I'm Rick Jordan, and today we're going all in. I like Costco. I love shopping there, and it's just a weird thing that I have. Call me a dork, I don't care. It's just, I love going there. One big thing that I love going there for is they always have this amazing Scotch that's typically Glen Ross. And if you know me, if you follow me, you know I'm a huge freaking Scotch fan, right? In addition to that, it's also humorous to me because I'm a speaker, I'm a cyber and AI expert, I'm an entrepreneur, an investor, and also the CEO of a public company. And this is hilarious to me because I still go to Costco, right? It's like the normal everyday stuff I always do. And I remember a photo a while back that one of my assistants took because I was we have a lot of televisions up in the office with Reach Out, and they show KPIs, they show a bunch of other things like presentations when we need to, all of that. And I was picking up new TVs, and here's me like lifting TVs right onto the Costco flatbed, and he got a photo of that. It was pretty cool, you know. Just so it's like, hey, still I obviously roll up my sleeves, but it doesn't matter. No joke. It doesn't matter if you think like you get to this point in life to where it's like you're successful, you don't do that stuff anymore. Everyday life goes on. And I talked about this like when I took the company public, right? It was like still the same thing. I'm still at my desk. I'm still replying to emails. I'm still doing all the things of everyday life because I don't truly think that there's this quote unquote thing that you've made it ever, right? I don't believe in that. I never believe in that. So I do have a propensity to actually spend too much time at Costco when I go there, just because I like seeing all the new stuff because they bring those one-time buys and everything. But today was different. Today was actually special. So I go in there and I'm just kind of looking around like the electronics area as I typically do. And it's really like there in the alcohol. Those two areas are the places I gravitate towards. And there's this gentleman there. His name is Wayne. And I just start talking to him a little bit. And he looks at me, he's like, you look like you work out. I'm like, well, yeah, I do. He's like, you lift iron? And I'm like, well, sure, dumbbells, you know, that's basically a lot of what I do, body weight resistance stuff and dumbbells, you know, that's how I stay fit. It gets my heart rate up, everything. It's like, that's good. He's like, I try to stay moving, you know, and that's the key really to long life is I try to stay moving. And I'm like, I would agree with you, man. And, you know, when I look at him, he's overweight. He's probably got about 40 pounds to lose. And at the same time, you look at his face and his face actually looks like really, really young. And he's like, guess how old I am? And I'm like, dude, I would say like 54, 55 years old, something like that. He goes, I'm 70. And I'm floored. I'm absolutely floored because this guy, I mean, we had been talking for a while, just about anything, right? Just about anything under the sun. Turns out this dude is 70 years old. He has been retired already, right? If you want to call it retired. And this is just what he does. He works full time at Costco. You know, he actually owned a business as well, which was intriguing to me. He had a fire restoration service that he owned for many, many years. And he was even talking through this and talking about, what I actually did. I mean, just listening to this guy was incredible to me. I stood there. It was well over an hour that I talked to Wayne at Costco. And I'm going to give you some of the tidbits of the stories that he was telling. And I love doing this. And I need to emphasize this today because if there's no other point you get from this, because there was a lot of good things that Wayne said, a lot of amazing things that Wayne said. The point of why I do this is I love talking to people that are like generations, like one or two, plural generations ahead of me in life, because the amount of experience that they have and just the amount of things that they've seen has always blown my mind. I had the honor and the privilege to actually officiate my grandmother's funeral a while back. I mean, I think this was 2009, if I remember right. I can't remember the exact year right now. She lived till 93. And, you know, part of the message that I gave, part of my talk when I was there was just mind-blowing to me, because as I thought back about what to say about my grandmother, I could say a lot of things about her. Her name was Maxine, right? And I could say a lot of cool things about her because her and I have a lot of the same sarcastic senses of humor. And it was funny because a lot of times her and I, this was my mom's mom, by the way, this grandmother, and even some of my mom's brothers would sometimes share that sarcastic sense of humor and poke fun at my mom a little bit, all in good fun, of course, but to the point to where all of us it just clicked in our brains. It clicked. It was a lot of coolness. And we would joke back and forth and just get each other. She was a really cool woman. And she lived all the way till 93 years old. And when I was giving the talk at the funeral, really like reflecting the day before and 2 days before about like, what do I say? I mean, I love my grandmother. I used to tell her, it's like, hey, you have to stay alive long enough to see my kids. That is my requirement of you, is you have to stay alive long enough to see my kids. And I remember when my twins were born, Richard and Ariel, she walked up to me, and I probably hadn't said it in like 5 years. For real, and she walks up to me, she goes, well, I did it. I did it, Rick. And I'm like, well, what do you mean you did it, Grandma? She goes, what you told me I needed to do. She's like, I did it. I just want you to know that I did it. And I'm like, okay, what is that? She goes, I stayed alive to see your kids. And she was saying it in this funny, snarky way. And I smile now. She said in this funny, snarky way, but like deep inside, and even as I think of it right now, it was something that she really treasured and something that I really treasured because I always wanted that. I always wanted her, specifically her, like out of all my grandparents. It was interesting. I wanted specifically her to meet my kids. And she passed away just a couple years after that when my kids were like 2 or 3 years old, when Richard and Ariel, my twins, were 2 and 3 years old. It was such a cool moment for me when she said that. So as I'm reflecting around my talk for her funeral, for her memorial service, I'm thinking back, I'm like, what do I say about this amazing woman? I mean, I can give my perspective, and that's what I should do. By the way, whenever you're giving a talk on something like this, if you have the honor or the privilege to ever officiate something like this, always do it from your perspective, because don't feel like you have to put on this show and say all these cliche things, whenever you're asked to speak at something like this. That's not the purpose of it, because the people there, for real, the people there will gain so much more out of it when they actually hear the realness of whatever it is, rather than like, oh, she had 35, great grandchildren or so. Actually, it was way more than that. I can't remember how many it was. It was a lot, right? However many, like dozens of grandkids, because she had 7 kids, and that's not the stuff that people want to hear. People want to hear the stories. They want to hear how you felt and how that person made you feel. And she always made me smile and laugh, and she would poke fun at me. She really sharpened my wit. She really, really did. So when I start to reflect about what I was going to talk about, and this is where I'm correlating it to Wayne, and why I love speaking to people that are in their 70s, their 80s, their 90s, like my grandmother, she lived to 93, is that they've seen so much. And I'm thinking back, and I said something along the lines of this at her funeral. I was just like, can you imagine everything that she witnessed in life? Because she was born in 1918. Mind-blowing, right? I guess we could do the simple math. And, 93, I remember her birth year. That's cool. Do the math there, right? Maybe that was 2011. Yeah, I think that's what it would be. And you think about that. It's like, to think about that. She, right when she was a kid, she was going through the roaring 20s. And even during like Prohibition, as a kid, and then as soon as she becomes a teenager is the Great Depression. She's in this phase now to where she's like, 15, 17, 18 years old. And the stock market crash was 1929. I hope you know your history around this. If not, you're going to learn it today. Like, she got to see all that just as she was entering her teenage years and forming a lot of who she was going to be for the next, 70 years, almost 80 years of her life. It's like she went through the Great Depression and she saw World War II. The start of it, in the middle of her 20s, was the end of the war. Then after that, she went through the Cold War, and she got to see all these amazing things like Elvis come to play in like the 50s, right? And the start of rock music and all these incredible things during the 50s and 60s. She was alive when Woodstock happened. I love music. That's why I related a lot of it to that. I'm like, think about this. It was like Elvis, and then Woodstock and rock and roll. And then all of a sudden the 70s hits and it's disco. And I'm like, she probably could have done without seeing that. right? But think about all the other things in the 70s and like the invention of the computer and when those got into play, because she worked at a hospital. She was an admission agent at the hospital that went like for decades and went from admitting people on paper and charts into computers when they first started arriving in the medical system. And I'm just going through these decades of her life and thinking about all of these things that she got to experience and the change in the world that happened around her that she was able to be a part of. So whenever I get to have a conversation like this with somebody who's that much older than me, I'm 44 as I'm recording this, right? 44. Wayne was 70, and that's what blew my mind because he looked freaking good. He looked like he was in his 50s, looked awesome. Right? And you could just tell because this guy smiled so much too. He smiled so much as he was talking. And you could tell like he had just like focused on a lot of happiness in his life. So I listen to people like that, and you need to listen to people like that. Anytime you get a chance to, talk to elderly people. There's some that are very, very disgruntled, of course, because that's the thing. It's like, I can only imagine if you like look back at your life and it's like, if you're 70, 80, which is another point, and think, man, how much time did I waste? I really didn't start doing stuff that I wanted to until I was in my 60s. I worked and toiled for 30, 40 years. And then I finally, quote unquote, retired to even just kind of make ends meet with Social Security, which is going to be gone at some point here in the next 20, 30 years, I bet you. Or I just made enough for my retirement, or I just really just woke up, went to work, paid bills. And at some point I'm going to die. People, it's crazy because it's like there's so much more to life. So as he was looking back and telling me these stories with like smiles on his face, and my grandma about all the things that she was able to see and the conversations that her and I had and the time that we spent together, that's what matters. So anytime you get a chance to, take the time, invest the time into yourself by just letting people who are in their 70s, 80s, and 90s pour into you about what they've seen in their lifetime. It's incredible, mind-blowing. He starts to tell me about his fire restoration service. He's like, you know what I did? I'm like, what's that, Wayne? He's like, I bought into a franchise. He goes, and I did that for 5 years. And he goes, there's a reason I did that. I bought into a franchise is because I had never done this before. I had to learn the business. It was something that looked like it could be very profitable, which it ended up being very profitable for him to the point where he said that he just had too much business coming in, right? Now, he didn't want to scale. That's a totally different conversation, but he got to the point to where he had to turn people away a lot because there was just so much coming in. And I'll tell you why he did that too, because he almost did like a white glove thing, which was amazing. Had no idea that fire restoration services could provide like a white glove experience, which is another part of this episode today. Another point that I learned from Wayne. As he's talking about the fire restoration and the franchise, he's like, I did the franchise for 5 years. And then I went out on my own. I'm like, that's interesting, man. Why did you go the franchise route first? He's like, because it was turnkey. They could teach me. I had the foundation of corporate to give me the sales structure, give me everything I had. He goes, because Rick, it's important. It's important to get good at what you do when you still have the foundation of other people around you to support you. And I'm like, dude, you are like speaking my language right now. Because I told him, I'm like, I just took my company public. I'm a speaker, all these other things, top 2% global podcast. It's like, that's awesome. He goes, what's the symbol? So I tell him what the symbol is and where it's trading. And I tell him the same thing. I'm like, dude, the only reason I got there because I've never done it, which is true of anything. I want you to hear this. You've never done it until you've done it. That is important because if you're like, oh, I've never done that, so I can't do that. No. You've just never done it because you've never done it. Just like Wayne, he never did fire restoration services before until he did it. And he got the right foundation and backing behind him to jump into that service. I didn't get a chance to ask him why that interested him so much. I wish I could go back now, but you know what? He actually told me, he's like, I work here full time. Come back and talk to me anytime. I'm like, that's awesome, dude. You're at my Costco right down the street. I'm going to come see you, dude. And we'll just hang out. And he was just, it was cool because he was just wiping down. He had like a microfiber cloth while we were talking, just wiping down the displays, the screens of the laptops, the iPads, all the electronics that were there, just making sure that they look good as he's telling me these stories. And I'm just sitting there soaking it in. This is such an awesome dude, smiling the entire way. He says, Rick, it's important to get that foundation underneath you. I'm like, yeah, man. I'm like, I've got people that are on my board that have done this before, that have taken companies public, that have been part of multiple companies that have gone public. I wouldn't know how to do it unless I had somebody to show me the way. He's like, that's right. You've got a good head on your shoulders. You know how the elderly people sometimes talk. I promised myself one time, by the way, that I would never say that phrase. You know, actually use it myself. I'm just quoting Wayne. So I'm still good within my promise to myself. And he starts talking about this. He's like, you know what? I invested $20,000 into getting that franchise. I'm like, that's it, man? He's like, yeah, that's what the franchise fee was. I'm like, man, now they're like, geez, you want to start a Domino's or something, it's like $100,000 just for the franchise, the franchise fee, whatever, to get involved and get the rights to have a Domino's or whatever. He's like, yeah, he goes, I also saved some money too. He's like, because I saved up for years to get to this point. To where I went out on my own and, it was like $20,000. He goes, most people will finance that. But he's like, when you have the cash, you should put it down. Now, I kind of disagree with him on that a little bit because there's some good debt that I believe that you can have. Like even with what I'm doing in business, there's debt. Yeah, but debt is the thing that fuels the growth and drives the revenue and keeps it going. I'm a full believer in using somebody else's money in order to make money yourself. It's fantastic, but it's what he wanted to do, and that's okay too. If that's what you want to do, that's awesome. Different perspectives. I just think that you can grow greater and faster with the use of money as a tool, with debt as a tool. Yeah, so he bought the franchise 5 years. Like then I went out on my own, but I learned everything I needed to in those 5 years. He goes, and then that's when my business really took off. I started hiring more people. He's like, can I tell you one thing I did? I'm like, dude, absolutely. I'm all ears, man. We're like 45 minutes into this right now. And he's like, what I would do is I got it down so much is that I would go on. Of course, these families, right? Their house just got destroyed in a fire. They are in essence homeless right now. Of course, they can get a hotel, whatever it is, but their home is destroyed. He's like, their emotional state is just absolutely incredible. And here they are, getting bids from multiple companies and all that. He goes, you know what I would do? I would sit down, I'd go out there, visit their home, their burnt up home, say, you know what? I know this is really tough for you. He goes, why don't I just take you out to dinner? Why don't I take your family out to dinner? That way you guys can breathe a little bit and we can talk about things that I want to do. Can you imagine that? Have you ever heard of like a fire restoration service doing something like that? My mind was blown because he's in the moment, like validating their emotions, showing that he's going to support them. And of course, there were deals that he would lose as well, but this like increases close ratio because he provided value up front. And it was value for what that family needed in their life right now. I've had clients ask me, it's like, hey, Rick, can you just come over for a second? I need to talk to you. I'm like, yeah, absolutely. Actually, ironically, this guy's name was Wayne too. I'm like, absolutely, my man. He's like, I just have to run some things by you. I'm like, okay. So I drive over. I didn't ask what it was about. A vet. He was a veterinary doctor. I go in and he's like, you know what, Rick, my dad passed away about 10 years ago and he was my sounding board. And here I am, right? Now, Wayne was like 60 at the time, the vet Wayne. I'm like 35. Okay. I'm sitting there and I'm like, what can I give this guy? And it's like, but that's the thing is he saw the value that I was able to bring. And I'm like, I just want to help you in any way that I can. He's like, my dad passed away and he was really my sounding board. So can I bounce some business ideas off of you? I'm like, dude, absolutely. And when I talked to Wayne at Costco, it was incredible the amount of value that he would provide for people up front, even if they were never going to choose him to restore their home. Now, of course, he increased his close ratio exponentially because he met them where they're at. He met well beyond the pain point of their destroyed home. He met their pain points of having the emotional baggage of having their home destroyed right out of the gate, just to give them value. I mean, you could see this guy, just like, if you want to call it the twinkle in his eyes, he was talking about this. He's like, Rick, I ended up actually getting a couple of homes, right? Fully furnished. We would call them really like Airbnbs these days, right? Fully furnished. They had dishes there. It actually had coffee for the coffee maker and everything. And he's like, I had it on my phone and I could just, or whatever, a tablet or whatever. I could just pull it up and be like, here you go. I'm going to set you up in this home. Because most of the fire restoration services, as he told me, anyways, would have homes available months out. Could you imagine that your home was destroyed and you can't get into a place that feels sort of normal for months while your home is still sitting there with nothing being done to it? He's like, that's the beauty of what I did, is I took on less customers. It was a higher price. I took on less customers at a higher price, but I met them where they were because it actually impacted their lives, not just the transaction of restoring their home from this catastrophic fire. It's like I'd pulled it up. I have a couple of homes that I'd have there, and I'd put them up in those homes as part of my service. He's like, of course, insurance services would pay for it. You know, their policy would pay for it and everything. But it was the fact that I was the one that was providing the homes and the temporary housing for these people, rather than them having to go out and find something elsewhere. It would be like an Airbnb today, but he reserved it only for his customers. Pretty freaking awesome, isn't it? So as I'm talking to him and just kind of like winding down and everything, it's like I'm picking up all these little tidbits. Some of it's validating what I'm already doing. Other things are just, reminding me of the human connection, which is so important in any kind of business. There's always a human element. I mean, sales is a very emotional thing. People typically, when you try to sell to them, they will buy on emotion and justify it later with logic. That's how sales goes. So you're meeting that human connection point every single time you sell, every single time you close a deal. And Wayne understood that he could provide value well beyond the actual service that he was providing. I tell you what, it's like I want to figure out something else I need to go buy from Costco now, because I want to go back and talk to the guy. Good thing I like it, right? I always check the Scotch aisle, see if they have a different Macallan in, or the Kirkland Speyside, which is usually Glen Ross, a good one, right? And it's like like a 17-year. I picked up 5 bottles of a 17-year. A 17-year Glen Ross would usually cost like $150. When Kirkland gets a hold of it, it ends up being like $56. It's a really good deal. You can thank me later for the tip. But I'm excited because every time I go back there now, I'm going to look for Wayne. I'm going to say, hey, what's shaking, Wayne? What do you got for me today? And just absolutely allow him to be able to continue to pour into my life, because this dude has seen so much, felt so much throughout the 70 years that he's been on this earth. And I appreciate him for even taking the time today to just converse with me for well over an hour. He's an awesome guy, and I hope you pick up today that this is something that you need to have, absolutely need to have in your life, is almost like story time. Just like when you were a little kid, right, with your parents, is just go sit at the feet of somebody who has been there, done it before, has their own take on life, who has had so many experiences that you can just sit there in awe and learn from. I pulled like 18 things out of today. I know you can pull at least one out. Do this, really, and your life will absolutely transform. Thanks for this today. I mean, I appreciate you sticking with me the whole episode. I appreciate you listening all the time. But this was something that really just warmed my spirit today that I had to share with you. All right, now go out there, find somebody to listen to.